Today marks the fourth day of the trial for the man who's accused of murdering Abby Williams and Libby German 7.5 years ago. Thanks for joining us tonight on WTHR Plus. This is your Delphi Debrief. Our senior investigative reporter Bob Siegel was in court today. And Bob, today the jury heard from witnesses who saw this so-called bridge guy. What did they learn?
Yeah, Scott, let's talk about that in a second. First thing I want everyone to know about is about this video that we saw in court today. It was the first time that we've seen this video, and let me give a little bit of background to that. The prosecutor and state police have said since the day that Richard Allen was arrested, they've insisted that this crime was committed by someone referred to as Bridge Guy. And Bridge Guy is the person that Libby German captured on her cell phone on the Monon High Bridge, we believe just moments before the girls were murdered. So today the jury got to hear a whole lot more about Bridge Guy. For the first time, the jury got to see a video, all of us in the courtroom got to see a video 43 seconds long that Liberty captured on her phone on the day of the murders. And I can't, unfortunately, show you that video. The judge is not allowing us to record it or to show it, and she's not allowing cameras inside the courtroom. So I can't show it to you, but I can tell you about that video. So let me kind of explain what was on that video. It shows Abby and Libby on the Monon High Bridge. The camera that Libby had, the phone that she had was pointed down toward the bridge deck. We hear Libby say, "There's no path." So we actually hear Libby's voice on there. And then, nearly undetectable in the background of this video, an image of a man walking behind the girls and his faint voice at the very end, something you've heard before. This afternoon, jurors heard video and audio specialist from Indiana State Police describe how we enhanced the video to isolate the still picture you're seeing of Bridge Guy, and how he also enhanced the video to hear the voice of Bridge Guy saying what all seems to sound to us like down the hill. The jury saw that image and heard the video that we've all heard so many times before. They got to hear it for the first time today. And Scott, it's incredible. When we watched that 43-second video in court today, at first, I had no idea that that is the Bridge Guy video. So it was fascinating. We got to hear two audio and visual specialists from Indiana State Police, Brian Bunner and Jeremy Chapman. They described how the video was enhanced, the video that they found on the phone, how they expedited processing of the video that investigators recovered from the cell phone that Libby had, and how they were able to brighten up the image, how they were able to rotate it, how they were able to work with the contrast and the lighting so they could capture this image of Bridge Guy in the background, who, again, when you see the video, there's only a couple frames where Bridge Guy's even visible back there. They were able to isolate that to put a picture out to the public. And then when we heard the video in the courtroom, the audio of Down the Hill, we couldn't hear that at all. So the investigators explained how in the lab they were able to isolate background noise that was on that video so that they could get rid of that background noise and enhance and accelerate the audio on there so that we could hear Down the Hill. And, you know, that's video, Scott, that the jury got to see today and is going to be a big part of this trial.
So, Bob, when we have seen this for 7 years, this video of Bridge Guy, you know, we see this guy walking on the Monon High Bridge. He's got his hands in his pocket. You just hear the, you know, Down the Hill, but it's on a loop for several seconds. So you're talking about 43 seconds. Is there anything else that we see that the jury saw on this 43-second tape Do we see anything else? Do we see the girls on this? Do we hear anything else at all?
Yeah, well, it appears to us that we see Abby Williams in the background walking towards Libby in this video, and I got to be honest, most of it is looking down at the railroad ties on that what's described as this really scary walk across the Monon High Bridge. Most of that area is now completely sealed off. You can't walk on it now. Most of that bridge decking has been rehabilitated, at least the portion that the public's allowed on. But it's looking down at these railroad ties, and really the usable portions, the portions that are going to be relevant to the jury here and that are of most interest, is this little image in the background of Bridge Guy and the voice that we hear. So those are the things that state police really highlighted very early on in their investigation and that we hear in this video today, but we've only seen a tiny little snippet of it today. We got to see that it was actually 43 seconds. And I will mention, Scott, that because this was the first time we've heard the girls' voices on there, during the lunch break, I saw Libby's mom right out here in this gazebo. There's a gazebo right behind me here on the courthouse lawn. And I wanted to clarify. I asked her, is that Libby? Is that Abby? Whose voice did you hear on there? And she said to me, yeah, that's Libby. And she said when she heard that in court, she said, I almost fell out of my chair. She said, it's been way too long since I've heard that voice.
It's got to be so hard for that family to listen and see those images. So I would imagine that everybody, not only in the courtroom, but also those of us who are watching your coverage, want to know, is Bridge Guy Richard Allen? Has the state been able to say, you know, in front of this jury, Bridge Guy is Richard Allen? And what are these witnesses that are testifying? What are they saying about the man that they saw?
Yeah, Scott, we just completed day 4 of testimony, and other than opening statements, Richard Allen's name has not been uttered by either the prosecution or the defense. We'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But you asked about the people who saw Bridge Guy. We heard today testimony from 3 separate women who say that they are confident that they saw Bridge Guy either on the Monon High Bridge or walking on the path leading to the bridge in really the hour or so leading up to when investigators think the murders actually happened. So I can tell you that Riley Voorhees and Brianne Wilbur, 2 of the women who testified, they're women now. They were teenagers back when this happened. They were actually classmates at Delphi High School of the 2 victims. They testified they were out on the path together on the day of the murders, and they say that they saw who was later identified as Bridge Guy. We also heard from Betsy Blair. She's a woman who frequently in 2016 and 2017 said that she went to the trails around the Monon High Bridge and the Freedom Bridge to walk and get exercise, doing 3 loops from one bridge to the other several days a week. And she was on the trails on the day of the murders, and she says that she saw Bridge Guy, and they are confident. I want to show you some of the quotes, some of the things that they directly told the jury today. Riley said, after she saw the image of Bridge Guy released by state police, she said, I can say with confidence, the person in the picture is the person that I saw out on the trail that day, actually closer to the Freedom Bridge, but not a long distance from the Monon High Bridge. Brianne Wilbur said, that is the person we passed on the trail, as she referenced the picture of Bridge Guy that the jury was seeing. And Betsy Blair said, I immediately knew when I saw that photo that was released by state police, that was the man I saw on the bridge. So that seemed to be some very positive identification as far as these 3 witnesses, not necessarily saying that they saw Richard Allen, but saying that they saw Bridge Guy. However, There's a big problem here for the defense because of the next testimony that they gave, and that testimony came during cross-examination by Jennifer Auger, one of the defense attorneys for Richard Allen. And she really pounded away on the reports, the testimony that all three of these women gave in the days just after the murders took place, and how they described Bridge Guy at that time. And so I want to show you some of the things that they said. Those descriptions that were brought up in court today, they described Bridge Guy back then as, Riley said, a larger man. Another one of them said a tall man, and not short is what we heard from Betsy Blair. They described him, Bridge Guy, as someone in his 20s or 30s. And Riley Voorhees said early 20s or 30s. He was described as muscular. Betsy Blair said Bridge Guy was boyish and youthful in appearance. We also heard him describe Bridge Guy as someone with brown, poofy hair by these women who say that they passed him and they saw him on the trails on the days of the murder. Why is that such a big problem? Well, because those descriptions offered in court today by these three witnesses of Bridge Guy don't match the defendant sitting at the defense table, the man who is accused of these crimes. Richard Allen, by most accounts, would be described as short. He was in his mid-40s at the time that the murders took place, not particularly muscular, wouldn't describe him that way. So the problem there is you have state police who are going to be testifying to this jury that Bridge Guy is the guy who committed these murders. Then you've got the jury having to weigh that with these three witnesses that the jury just heard from saying, we saw Bridge Guy and he looked like this, this, and this, and the things they're describing do not match the man that jurors are looking at throughout this trial and who's accused of this crime. So that is potentially a big misstep by the state today. And actually, by putting these witnesses on the stand, there was another potential misstep that came up today, and that is the state successfully, they argued to try to get the sketches of the suspect that were released immediately after the murders. The state does not want the jury to see those sketches because they say it could confuse the jury. Well, today on the stand, while the state had one of the witnesses there, Betsy, brought up these sketches and talked about the fact that the description that she offered, Betsy Blair said the reason that she was giving these descriptions was to state police investigators to help them create the sketches. At that point, Brad Rosie, one of the defense attorneys, his eyes lit up, they got real wide, and he looked over at the other defense counsel, and at the end of the hearing, he mentioned to the judge, he said, look, now this has come up in court, this has been part of the testimony brought on by one of the state's witnesses about these sketches, and he said to the judge, this is something we are going to want to revisit. So by putting Betsy Blair on the stand and having her bring up these sketches, that opens the door for evidence to be introduced that the state does not want to be introduced. So again, I think the evidence from these three witnesses on the trails who say that they saw Bridge Guy on the day of the murder, this isn't going to be the last time we hear, especially from the defense, about the testimony that they gave today, Scott.
It's so interesting. As you were talking, we did put up both of those sketches, so our viewers got a chance to see how different these two sketches look like that state police put out. Let me ask you about Richard Allen. While he was hearing this testimony from these three witnesses, what, if any, reaction did Richard Allen have as he was listening to these witnesses and hearing this testimony discussed?
Let's be totally transparent. So there are some days, Scott, where 13 News has one of 12 media passes to be in the courtroom, and on those days, I'm able to sit right in the first row, often in a seat that's right behind Richard Allen, maybe 10 feet away from him, so I get a really good view of him. Today, I didn't have one of those passes. My producer, Susan Batt, was actually in line outside the courthouse at 12:30 this morning to secure a seat to make sure that we could be somewhere in the courtroom today and to make sure that we could get a seat. So I was seated further back. I did not have as close a view of Richard Allen today. I can tell you throughout the trial, though, he has been taking notes frequently. He's also been talking with his defense counsel a fair amount, but as far as his exact reaction during the testimony this afternoon, I did not have a chance to see that.
Okay, Bob, thanks so much for answering that. That gives our viewers, I think, also an idea of the steps that our TV station is taking every day to make sure that we have representation inside to watch court and to do what you and Emily have been doing over these first 4 days. Yeah. So we appreciate the whole team and their effort to make sure that we're in there. So let me talk about the pictures of the evidence that was collected at the scene. You know, we saw a lot of that yesterday in terms of inside the court.
Yes.
Did we get more information about that evidence today?
We did not necessarily get more information about the evidence, but the jury did hear some really interesting details about how that evidence is collected. The state wants to really paint a picture for the jury that investigators that were out at the crime scene were very thorough and methodical in how they did their job. So today we heard more testimony from one of the witnesses who testified late yesterday afternoon, Brian Olehy. He is a crime scene investigator who was kind of in charge of the crime scene right after the girls were found murdered. He testified this morning to explain how all of the evidence was collected, and the jury actually got to see, let me see here, it was 49 different bags, some of them very small, some of them big bags. These were bags that contained the evidence that they collected both at the crime scene and an area called Ground Zero, right around where the girls' bodies were found, as well as evidence that was collected during the autopsies performed on Abby and Libby. Those were performed at a hospital in Terre Haute. And he showed these bags, and they contain clothes and shoes, swabs of blood. Libby's cell phone was in one of the bags. The bullet cartridge that is going to play a major role in this trial that was found between the girls' bodies, that was in one of the bags. There were fibers collected from the girls' fingernails. That's some of the types of evidence that was collected at the crime scene, and by showing these bags to the jury, they were trying to explain how all of this evidence was collected, that it was very secure. I thought it was interesting. I personally was interested in seeing the evidence inside the bags. I'm guessing maybe some of the jurors were interested in seeing that as well. We did get to see photographs of that evidence yesterday. Today, it was just the brown paper bags. They were labeled, and it had the chain of custody on there again. It was really the state's way of trying to help the jurors understand the great lengths that crime scene investigators go to secure evidence and to make sure that it is safe and that the integrity of the evidence is maintained in case it needs to be tested, in case it needs to come up at a later time as evidence that needs to be looked at more closely for a trial like this.
Hey, yeah, it's good that you're talking to our viewers about that chain of custody. While you were talking, we did see some video of the river that was near what the authorities are calling, Ground Zero, where the bodies were found. I'm interested in hearing from you about the clothing that was gathered at Ground Zero, and the fact that one of the girls not wearing any clothes, the other girl wearing the other girl's clothes. Is that what was found and talked about during the trial today?
Yeah, we did hear about how Abby Williams was wearing Libby German's sweatshirt and pants. And there was an interesting question that was submitted by one of the jurors asking the crime scene investigators, was the ground under Abby Williams, did it appear that there was a disturbance there or that the leaves had been brushed away to suggest that perhaps that switch of clothing might have taken place right there at the crime scene by whoever might have committed the murders? We were told by the investigators it did not appear that there was a disturbance like that. So I thought that that was really interesting. Scott, you mentioned about just how much evidence has been collected, and that means that these jurors, I don't know how else to put it. I mean, there's the risk that they're being overwhelmed with exhibits because every single one of the photographs, every one of the reports, the CVs, the resumes of each of the experts going up to talk to the jurors. There's so much evidence, and every bit of it is pretty much entered as exhibits that the jury can refer to later. And so they are just collecting one piece after another, all these exhibits that are, they call it being published. By publishing it, it's accepted by the court, and then it's published, and it goes into a binder, a folder that these jurors can refer back to over and over again throughout the trial. They're not allowed to take any of those exhibits out of the courtroom with them. They all have to stay in the court every day at the end of the day when they leave the court, but then it's there waiting for them when they come back, and it will be available to them in their deliberations. And speaking of exhibits, today, there was an interesting development in this case that didn't happen here in Delphi. It actually happened a couple hours away over in Fort Wayne. If you recall, over the summer, there were some pretrial hearings, and there was tons of exhibits that was entered during those hearings. The judge basically had told us we requested to see those exhibits, and the judge said, no, I'm not going to let you see them until after the trial's over. We pushed back, and the judge finally allowed access to those. That was today over in Fort Wayne, and our Emily Longnecker went to Fort Wayne, went to the Allen County Courthouse to look through all these exhibits, and I'd like to check in right now with Emily to find out what was actually in those exhibits. Emily?
Yeah, Bob, during those pretrial hearings in July and August, we saw both the state and the defense enter into the record lots of exhibits, and today we got a chance to look at some of those exhibits. They were here in Allen County. We were not allowed to video any of them or take pictures. All we had, like during the trial, our paper and our pen to copy down, in some cases word for word, exactly what we were seeing. The most notable pretrial exhibit today came from the state. It showed a form the state says Richard Allen filled out requesting an interview with the Westville prison warden, John Gallipo. Now, that form was dated March 5th, 2023. On it, 2 sentences the state says Richard Allen wrote, quote, "I am ready to officially confess for killing Abby and Libby. I hope I get the opportunity to tell the families I'm sorry." Now, you'll remember that the defense has pushed back on 60 plus alleged confessions that the state says Allen has made during his time in prison. The defense has said that Allen made those alleged confessions during mental duress caused by the solitary confinement conditions that he was living in. Judge Gall ruled in late August after those pretrial hearings that the jury would be able to hear those alleged confessions during trial. So we do expect that this paper that we saw today here from the pretrial exhibits, that the jury will likely see that. And we looked at several other exhibits. There were thousands and thousands of pages. We couldn't get through them all, but we spent a good part of the day going through them. Here's what we did not see, which we heard about during the pretrial hearings, and we thought we might see them today when we got to view these exhibits, but we did not see them. We did not see autopsy reports for Abby Williams and Libby German. We did not see emails from Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter with updates. They included updates to the FBI in the early days of the investigation. We did not see those emails that were talked about during the pretrial hearings. We also didn't see a report from Steve Mullins, an investigator for the state who was Delphi's police chief at the time of the murders. We learned in pretrial hearings that that report detailed interactions that Mullins had with a possible suspect. Now, at the time, the state objected to that report being entered into the record, but it was entered noting their objection. We also saw several exhibits dealing with Odinism, a Norse pagan religion. The defense has said that they believe that Abby and Libby were killed in a ritualistic killing as part of an Odinistic ritual killing, and they have deposed several people that they believe are potential suspects that could have been involved. We read through some of those depositions today. Again, hundreds and hundreds of pages. We could not get through them all. Now, keep in mind that Judge Gull has ruled that the jury will not get a chance to hear about that defense theory or hear about those alternate suspects. That ruling came out also in August. But again, I think the most notable exhibit that we saw today was that piece of paper that the state says Richard Allen signed to the prison warden, saying that he was ready to confess to the killings of Abby and Libby and apologize to their families. Bob?
Thanks a lot, Emily. So we should point out Judge Gull has ruled that the Odinism information and the evidence and the witnesses surrounding that as far as a third-party perpetrator, that the jury would not be able to hear that, but the defense will get another chance during the trial to try to convince the judge to allow them to present that to the jury in what's called an offer of proof. So that is still yet to come. Scott, you had mentioned earlier, what has the jury heard so far about Richard Allen? Well, you know, the jury heard during opening statements the state say that that is the individual who is responsible for the deaths of Abby and Libby. Since then, through 4 days of testimony, not a word about Richard Allen, and that's not by mistake. You know, they are trying to lay the groundwork, very systematically working their way up for the jury to help them understand the crime scene, the evidence that was collected, the terrain, the geography, and then moving their way into people who are at the scene, who can identify Bridge Guy, that we heard that today. And so we expect in the next several days we will transition from the general details about the crime scene and Bridge Guy to the state trying to help the jury to understand why they believe that Richard Allen is Bridge Guy and why he is responsible. And you just heard Emily talking about these confessions. That's going to be coming up as well, and we expect that is going to be a central part of this trial. So lots more evidence the state will present coming up this week. We are back tomorrow in the front row. We do have a media pass to be able to bring you coverage, as we have during every day of the trial, and our intent is to be inside the courtroom during every day of the trial to bring you continuing coverage. So, Scott, for now, I'm going to send it back to you. The sun has set here in Delphi. We'll be back at it tomorrow morning. Court is scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. for day 5.
All right, Bob, you and the team are doing an outstanding job bringing viewers into the courtroom and laying out what you're hearing as we go into day 5 on Wednesday. Thanks so much. We're going to be breaking down the Delphi murders trial every weeknight at 10 o'clock right here on WTHR+. You can also find our ongoing coverage, including detailed reports on each day of this trial on WTHR.com/Delphi. Thanks for joining us.